Hello and welcome. Welcome to Input English. Today's episode is a story. It's about a book, it's about a place, and it's about a man. And they're really three stories combined into one. This whole episode started with a book recommendation made to me many years ago. The fellow who recommended it to me was an interesting, unusual fellow. He was a graduate of West Point, and looking at his history, he was a warrior. He recommended a book to me, and I paid attention to his recommendation. I bought the book, and I read it. The book is entitled The Killer Angels. The Killer Angels was written by Michael Shara, who was an American writer and English professor. Michael Shara was teaching at the Florida State University, and at the time he was teaching there, my wife was a student there. Now, she didn't know him, but she was certainly aware of his presence on campus as a member of the faculty, as an associate professor. He went up to the Gettysburg area in Pennsylvania to do his work to develop his book, The Killer Angels. That book was published in 1974, and it received the Pulitzer Prize in 1975. The book was about the great battle at Gettysburg during the Civil War. The book is best described as historical fiction. He based the story on the actual facts of the battle and the people who participated in that battle. To that extent, it was historical. However, he gave dialogue and details for his book that turned it into historical fiction because we have no record of the actual dialogue, for instance, between Longstreet and Robert E. Lee. There are some things written down, but the actual dialogue was not recorded, and so that, for our understanding of the story, is provided by the author. So this genre of book is historical fiction. And this book was heavily referred to by Ken Burns when he created his 1990 movie, The Civil War, and then in 1993, when a movie was made about Gettysburg, it was largely an adaptation of The Killer Angels. The Killer Angels was the starting point for the screenplay. Of course, Michael Shara had a huge selection of characters because of the vast numbers of people who participated in this great battle. For me, having read this book, one character in particular stood out, and we'll discuss him a little later. The place. Gettysburg is a relatively small town, and it was a small town in the early 1860s. It had a courthouse and some streets and some buildings, but it was not a large metropolis. It was a small town. The battlefield area was actually outside of town in the countryside adjacent to the town. After the conclusion of the battle, Abraham Lincoln gave his famous Gettysburg Address at this location in Gettysburg. Since the Civil War, this battlefield has been preserved as a national treasure and is now a large park that we can visit. We can visit the various locations that were important in the Battle of Gettysburg, and we can visit locations that were depicted in the book. In about 2010, I had an opportunity to go to Gettysburg, and we explored the park. We explored this historical location, but I had already read the book, The Killer Angels, and so the familiarity with the locations in the park were fresh in my mind. One of the locations in particular was a place in the park that I made certain I visited. And the third facet of this story is the man. The man I'm talking about is Joshua Chamberlain. He was an educator from Maine, but he was pressed into military service because he was needed for the war effort. So he was in command of troops in the Union Army. He was tasked with holding the flank of the Union Army, and his location that he was to defend during this great battle was Little Round Top. During the battle, there were great difficulties, including problems with getting supplies and, in particular, ammunition. At a crucial time in this battle, Chamberlain's men were running very low of ammunition, but the enemy, the Confederate troops, were coming up the hill toward them. They were at risk to be overrun. It was at this point Chamberlain issued bold orders, which surprised his subordinates, but turned out to be a very effective way of handling this horrible situation in which they had been placed. The defense of Little Round Top by Chamberlain and his men is famous in American history, and this was a place I had to visit. When we visited this battlefield park, I made certain that I went to Little Round Top and stood substantially where Chamberlain and his men stood as they faced the enemy and prosecuted this dramatic battle. The book, The Killer Angels, is readily available. I recommend it. It is well written, it is easy to understand, and it has a great deal of information in it about American history, as well as the human situation, that is, men in a terrible, difficult situation and how they responded. The book is very much worth reading. For those who have opportunity to visit the United States, I do recommend, if you can, to consider visiting this wonderful site. It's a beautiful countryside. It has a lot of history. And for those who do visit it, it's a very positive experience. I consider Joshua Chamberlain one of my heroes, best described as a reluctant leader who did what was necessary and got results. After the war, Chamberlain returned to Maine, became the president of Bowdoin College, and also served as governor of the state of Maine. Reading great books like The Killer Angels and other literature allows us a version of time travel. It allows us to know something about someone who lived and died many years ago. I realize that few of you watching this video will have an opportunity to visit Gettysburg, but the book is readily available and there is a lot of information available online about Joshua Chamberlain. That's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I invite comments below, and I invite you to join us in future videos. See you soon.